Welcome to the special edition of the Solemnity of Christ the King, a celebration that marks the end of the liturgical year. To present the program, my name is Mariana Banda. In the studio, I'm with Father Arthur, who is going to help us understand the significance of the solemnity. Father, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Father. Without wasting much of our time, Father, what is the Solemnity of Christ the King? When was it established, and what significance does it communicate to us?
Yeah, the Solemnity of Christ the King, first of all, like you said in the introduction, is a solemnity that closes the liturgical year and ushers into the new year. It was just a Sunday after the Sunday of Christ the King. We celebrate the first Sunday of Advent, and with the first Sunday of Advent, we begin the new liturgical year. What does this communicate? The solemnity communicates the universality of the kingship of Christ, and this is the core of the celebration itself. That Jesus is the universal King. And when we talk about the universality of the kingship of Christ, we're talking about a kingship that is not territorial, a kingship that goes beyond boundaries. You know, in our own political and social setups, we have kings, we have chiefs, we have presidents, we have MPs, councillors, etc., etc. Even within the church, we have bishops. You know, we have priests within parishes, and so on and so forth. Now, this setup of leadership is territorial. If I am bishop in this particular diocese, it means that I can't go in another diocese to do whatever I want to do. If I am president in this particular country, I can't go in another country to do whatever I want to do. If I am councillor in this particular territory, so it's territorial, okay? But when you talk about the kingship of Christ, it goes beyond territories. It is universal. It is universal, meaning that even living beings of heaven, if you like, bow to this universal Christ, to the universal kingship of Christ. How did this start? When did it start? There isn't much history to this solemnity, but it suffices to say that the solemnity of Christ the King started with the encyclical that Pope Pius the 11th wrote in 1925, and the name of the encyclical is actually Quas Primas. It's Latin. Okay. Yeah, but it's an encyclical that basically talked about the kingship of Christ, and there's a reason why the Pope Pius the 11th thought of giving us this encyclical then, because of what was happening in the world at that time. So the world was just coming from the end, or from the First World War, and countries were trying to re-establish themselves. Presidents of various countries were trying to redefine their leadership, redefine their offices as presidents, and so on and so forth. But also the world was trying to was getting into what was called secularism, okay? Whereby because you know you're just coming from ruins of war, so your faith is kind of disturbed, okay, because of what has happened. So what you want to do now, coming from that kind of a situation, is to attach yourself to something that you feel and think can give you immediate answers, immediate reasons to live. It's like you feel God has failed you. Because I mean, if God cares about me, if God cares about us, He shouldn't have allowed the war. So you are in a situation where people are driven from the presence of God, and they're trying to attach themselves to things like wealth. You know, the message that the world at that time is preaching is get as much wealth as possible. The message that the world is preaching to rulers, to kings, is get as much power as possible, have as much power as possible. So in that kind of a context, Christ does not have a place in the people's lives anymore. So the Pope Pius the 11th gave us that encyclical to help the people re-establish their faith in Christ. That yes, you could be coming from this war, you could have gone through these ruins, but that does not take away anything from the universality of the kingship of Christ. That Christ still remains your king. And there is no earthly power that surpasses surpasses the kingship of Christ. Because that time, the presidents and kings and chiefs and all that are trying to communicate the fact that they have universal powers in a way, that they have all the powers and everybody has to bow to them. And because of that, many people are taken away from the face of Christ. So the encyclical is trying to bring people back to that the right path, so that they understand that regardless of everything that happens or that has happened in the recent years, the wars and everything, Christ is still the central element of their lives, is still important. And that is the message that even now we communicate, we preach when we celebrate the solemnity of Christ the King. Originally, when Pope Pius XI established this feast, then it was just a feast before it became a solemnity. It was to be celebrated towards the end of October. But then years later, during the reign of Pope Paul the Sixth, particularly in 1969, it was moved to be the close of the liturgical year. Also to emphasize the fact that yes, we've done all these Sundays in the liturgical year that is just ending, but in the final analysis, everything has to end and start with Christ. So Christ, the solemnity of Christ the King, is put at the end. Pope Paul VI moved it to the end of the liturgical year to communicate this fact that regardless of all the celebrations that we've had, Christ is still the end and the beginning, Alpha and Omega. The end and the beginning. Because with this celebration, we are also starting a new liturgical year. So we start again with Christ, just as we end this liturgical year with Christ. And because of that, the feast became now a solemnity, became a huge celebration in the church, a huge celebration that it still is in the church.
No, thank you so very much for the beautiful explanation, Father. How can the faithful practically embrace and live out the kingship of Christ in their daily lives?
It is by learning from the leadership of Christ. Because Christ, being the universal King, communicates to us the values of selflessness, the values of sacrifice, the values of love, the values of expressing concern for the other, genuine concern for the other. So how do you live out the message of Christ the King? It is by embracing these values that Christ taught us. Remember when Jesus is being asked at his trial, they are asking him about his kingship. Your kingship, how come you are a king, but you are all alone here and you don't have armies and you don't have... Then just corrects that impression and says, my kingship is not of this earth. My kingship is of the kingdom of God. It is a humble kingship, because if Jesus had wanted to have a kingship of majesty and pomp, he would have had a whole army around him to protect him. But his kingship is beyond all that, and that is the impression that he corrects. That's what he corrects in the minds of those that are persecuting him at his trial. He simply tells you and me to say, if you want to be a king, if you want to be a queen, even if you want to be a proper leader, you cannot do that without sacrifice, without you being the sacrificial lamb. In the those years back, and I think this still exists in some traditions where kings do not die alone. When a king dies, somebody has to die with the king. Exactly. But Christ, the kingship of Christ is not like that. The kingship of Christ is such that it is Christ himself being king that dies for his subjects. It is Christ that stands in the battlefront to take the bullets on your behalf. as compared to the worldly kingship. You know, sometimes I look at presidents when they are moving. They are going wherever they are going. You see the motorcade and all the security around them, and the vehicle that they're traveling on is fully protected, like it is bulletproof. You know, and when they are giving a speech, they are taken to the podium to speak. You have all these guys with suits and whatever that stand around them. Ideally, you want to think that these are supposed to take the bullet for the president. Well, we are not criticizing that. It's fine. That's but what we are trying to say is that Christ is the one that takes the bullet on your behalf. So he is your king, but he stands in front of you. You're not the one that stands in front of him as a shield. He is the one that becomes your shield to take the blows, to take the bullets on your behalf. And that is what we learn from him also as Christians, to be able to stand in the battlefront for one another, to look out for one another, to take care of each other. That is the only way to lead like Christ.
Thank you so very much, Father. Father, why does the church emphasize Christ as the king when his mission on earth was marked by humility and service? The church still emphasizes, Christ as king, because that is what he is. He is a universal king. And his kingship is such that it's not like what we have. Is one that is marked by humility and service, and that is the message that the church also wants to communicate on the celebration of Christ the King. That the kingship of Christ is one that is marked by humility and service, and that is what you are supposed to be also as chairperson of the Smokeson community, as chairperson of that lay group, as chairperson of the parish, as treasurer of that particular committee. Your kingship, your leadership has to take after the leadership of Christ. You have to be ready to be put on the slaughter board, to die for others, to sacrifice something about yourself for others. And that is why the church continues to emphasize the kingship of Christ and the values that this kingship carries with it. The values of selflessness, sacrifice, love, the values of altruism, the values of giving oneself for others. That is the message of the solemnity, and that will still remain the message of the solemnity of Christ the King. Very important especially for individual Christians, but most important also for those that are occupying positions of leadership. Okay. In case you have just joined us, we are talking a celebration of the solemnity of Christ the King. With me in the studio is Father Arthur. Father, the period of Advent comes immediately after we celebrate the solemnity of Christ the King. Is there any special connection between the two?
Is there any special connection? Maybe yes, maybe not. Well, like I said, Pope Paul VI moved the celebration of Christ the King to the end of the liturgical year, so that the year ends with Christ, but also at the same time so that the new liturgical year begins with Christ. Is there any connection between Advent and the solemnity? Liturgically, there is no connection as such, but you know that whenever we celebrate the solemnity, whenever we celebrate any liturgical function, the center is Christ. Okay, the point of focus is Christ. Even as we start the period of Advent, the point of focus is Christ. You know that Advent is about waiting for Christ, waiting for the birth of Christ, waiting for the second coming of Christ. So the center is Christ. So you can say, yes, there is a connection between the solemnity of Christ the King and Advent from that angle. We are just about to start a new liturgical year that begins with Advent. And just before we begin the new liturgical year, we are celebrating Christ the King. Yeah. So it is like Christ himself as King leading us into a new zone, a new period, a new time of reflection in our spiritual life. So Christ has carried us on his shoulders up to the end of this liturgical year. But he doesn't leave us there. He doesn't abandon us there. He wants to carry us into the new liturgical year that begins with Advent. There are a lot of connections actually that you can talk about.
Okay. All right. No, thank you very much, Father. Father, how can we reflect on Christ the King in the light of earthly power?
Earthly power has to take after Christ. Earthly power has to take after Christ. Unfortunately, today we have leaders that lord it over others. That is, the leaders that become a burden to the community, leaders that become a burden to the people that they are leading. It's unfortunate. But what we are supposed to understand, if we want to be Christians, if we want to say we follow Christ, then everything we do has to be motivated and determined by Christ and his way of doing things. Our leaders in the church and in the secular world have to understand, unless they don't believe in Christ, okay? But if you have leaders that also go to church on Sunday that believe in Christ, then they have to understand that even their way of leadership has to be motivated and determined by the leadership of Christ. If you are a leader and you want to do leadership according to how you think it should be done, then you can't even call yourself a Christian leader. You can't even call yourself a leader at all, because a Christian leader has to take after the leadership of Christ. Within the church, this can't even be overemphasized. We know that within the church, every leadership in the church has to take after the leadership of Christ. You go to a Smoke Some community meeting and you have this chairperson that thinks the Smoke Some community belongs to him or belongs to her. Okay, he or she has to decide what happens, and if anybody raises any issue against what he or she has decided, then that becomes an issue. That becomes a problem. You have leaders in the church sometimes who want to make decisions without consultation, and in the church we've been talking about synodality, which is about deciding together, consulting each other, coming to a round table so that we talk as the lay faithful, as the clergy, etc., etc. But you still see some leaders who want to do things according to the way they think things should be done. Yeah. Are they leading like Christ? No. Are they taking after the leadership of Christ? No. Jesus has a group of people that he's working with, okay? The disciples and many others. He's not a solitary player, or he's not a lone minister. He has this group of other ministers around him that is teaching, but he is also leading, showing them the correct way of doing leadership. And those that are the ones that become leaders of the church after the ascension, they are the ones that begin to establish Christian communities. It is only because they have learned from the master, they have learned the correct way of doing things from the master, that they establish the Christian community, and that Christian community starts growing and is still growing even up to now, because they have handed over what they have learned from Christ to those that come after them. So now this is church leadership, but also in the secular world we can say the same thing, because those in the secular world are leading people. They're not leading animals. Yeah, sometimes you can lead animals, if you're a shepherd, you are a leader. Yes. Not so. Yes. Yeah. In some cultures where they do shepherding of animals, they will not put you as a shepherd of the head of animals if you're not correct up there. You have to be correct. No, the fowls have to be in order, because they consider you as a leader. Okay, if you are not correct, then they're afraid that you might mislead the animals, and the animals might get lost. Yeah. So now here we are talking about leadership with people, okay? So now in the secular world, we have presidents, we have MPs, we have councillors, we have union leaders, you have all sorts of leaders wherever they are serving. even at places of work, you have bosses, you have human resource, you have what. All these are leaders in the secular world. How are they going about their way of doing leadership? What is motivating their way of doing leadership? Do they go into that position to lead according to what they think should be the way to go about leadership? Or are they inspired by the leadership of Christ? If you're a public leader, for example, here in Zambia, you know that the Constitution talks about Zambia as a Christian nation. It means that when you go into that public office, you subscribe to what the Constitution is saying. And if you subscribe to what the Constitution is saying, it means that you cannot lead away from Christ. That your leadership has to follow what Christ did. Sacrifice, feeding the poor, giving water to those that are thirsty, being out there and offering a service without expecting anything in return. That is what it means to lead like Christ. But unfortunately, you get to meet people who get into those positions of leadership, and then they begin just to enrich themselves. They begin to put all the resources in their own pockets, because their way of leading is to become rich, and not to make the people that they are leading rich, but to sustain themselves, to enrich themselves, to put everything in their own pockets, so that when after 5 years they leave that office, then they are okay. They are comfortable. But anyway, the law has always a way of catching up with people like that. But the point that we are making here is not only those that are in the church, but also those that are leading outside the church, those that are in the secular world, should lead like Christ. Sacrifice. Should make the people that are leading rich, and not themselves.
Thank you so very much. Understood, Father. Finally, briefly, help us understand how the Catholic Church calendar is calculated to ensure it ends with the solemnity of Christ the King in November.
There isn't really a particular way that the calendar is calculated to ensure that it ends with Christ the King. I can still go back to 1969. 1969, during the reign of Pope Paul VI, who moved the calendar, the feast or the solemnity of Christ the King to the last Sunday of ordinary time in the liturgical year. Of course, I've already talked about the reason why that was done, the emphasis that was trying to communicate by moving the feast and making it a solemnity. How is the calendar calculated to ensure that it is not calculated in any way? It is arranged, actually. It is arranged, but there is no particular reason as to why we have the solemnity, like liturgically, why we have the solemnity of Christ the King at the end of the liturgical calendar. There is no, like written in black and white reason why that is done. That's why I referred to 1969. That this was simply moved to the end of the liturgical calendar to emphasize the fact that in as much as we want to end the liturgical year with Christ, it is important that we also begin the new liturgical year with Christ as the sovereign, the sovereign leader of our lives or our spiritual lives. We can talk about the liturgical calendar, but that is going to be an episode on its own. It will take us the whole day. But for the purposes of our viewers, it's important for them to understand that as we end the liturgical calendar, we are ending with Christ. But we are also beginning the new liturgical calendar with Christ, who is a universal king. And being a universal king, Christ is not his leadership is not territorial. It goes beyond boundaries. That is important, and that is the message that we communicate as we celebrate the solemnity of Christ the King. The solemnity of Christ the King is about the universal leadership of Christ, Christ, leader of our lives, but also of our world and the whole universe. Christ, who makes it possible for us to come to the end of the liturgical year, but who also gives us an opportunity to get to the new liturgical year, because everything has to revolve around Christ.
Yes.
Everything has to end with Christ and begin with Christ.
Yes.
Even when you are waking up in the morning, your day has to start with Christ and end with Christ. Don't end the day with castle. It has to end with Christ. Say a prayer before you go to bed.
Sure.
Don't drink before you... No, say a prayer.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful, and I'm so excited. I've learned a lot, and it was a refreshing of memory as well to me. I hope our dear viewers, you've heard what Father has explained about the solemnity of Christ the King, that we are ending the liturgical calendar with Christ and beginning a new calendar with Christ. Let Christ be the leader of our lives as he is the leader of the universe. Your final words, Father, or conclusion rather?
My final words would just be to appreciate the significance, or rather to encourage our viewers, our people out there, to appreciate the significance of the solemnity of Christ the King. You have to understand that your life has to revolve around Jesus. If your life revolves on anything else rather than Christ, then it means you are in the wrong place. You are lost. So and this is the message that we communicate on the solemnity of Christ the King, that Christ is the ruler of your life. He's the ruler of everything that you do, everything that you say, everything about you. Jesus is the ruler, the Alpha and Omega, the end and the beginning. That's why your life has to begin and end with Christ. Your activities have to begin and end with Christ. Our liturgical year has to begin and end with Christ. Everything has to revolve around Christ. I hope people will find time to attend Mass, either online or physically at their parish, to celebrate this important feast. Those that did not have time to attend Mass for one reason or another, they can always follow online Mass. And when we stream online Mass, especially on our page as Lumen TV, when we stream online Mass, we don't delete. It remains there, so you can still come back to it and follow and listen to the message, etc., etc. It's important for all of us to just stop everything that we are doing and go and celebrate Christ the King, because he is the beginning and end of our life.
Oh, thank you so very much, Father. It was a joy that you had found time to share with us and our dear viewers about the solemnity of Christ the King. I would have loved us to continue talking about this beautiful solemnity, but it's unfortunately we can't go on. To our viewers, it was so nice that you tuned into this beautiful edition. I hope you have learned something as much as I have learned something. With me, I've been Mariana Banda and Father Arthur, who was helping us to explain more about the solemnity of Christ the King. For now, it's bye-bye and stay blessed.